Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Growing Up with Godzilla. This is my show where I have conversations with Godzilla fans about how they've grown with the character and franchise over time. Right now, we are fully immersed in season three, and I've had such great conversations with some wonderful human beings, familiar faces, new faces. And this evening, well, I don't know if it's evening where you're watching it, but at this particular moment for this episode, we are having a familiar face on who many of you probably may know. However, this is their first appearance on Growing Up with Godzilla, so I'm pretty stoked about that. So without further ado, I would like to welcome filmmaker, writer, producer, co-founder of Resistance Pictures, Yoko Higuchi. Hello.
Hi, that's quite an intro. I don't know if I can follow that up, but thank you.
I mean, I pride myself in having a good intro. I do my studying, so well, at least I try to.
Yeah.
So,
No, I
how are
appreciate it.
you?
I'm good. It's a weekend, so I am happy that, yeah, I'm doing very well. How about yourself?
I am pretty peachy. I've been doing a lot of work this weekend, as we were just talking about a few minutes ago, and I'm kind of like mentally just blah blah blah. Blah. So if I seem that way during this episode, everybody forgive me. But I will endeavor to be on my A game per the usual. But I'm really excited to finally meet you. We've interacted quite a bit on social media,
Mhm.
and we've supported each other's stuff, and I really value that because I feel like in the Godzilla fandom, whenever we have opportunities to uplift one another, it's always great to support each other's, work.
Mm.
So my first question for you, I mean, leading up to the primary ones that I normally ask would be like, when did you first kind of enter the online Godzilla fandom and how did that take shape for you?
That's a good question. I don't know how they found me, but Benjamin Chaffins, who I think at that point was on like GodzillaMovies.com, I think, found me somehow. I don't know how this happened, but like him and like two other people on Twitter and I think Facebook have found me and discovered that I did work on Shin Godzilla
Mm.
and I did
As a
a
production
interview.
assistant, right?
Yes, I was a production
Mhm.
assistant in 2015. And I did an interview and that story kind of went out and then more people discovered it. So it was kind of a surreal moment where I saw a lot of traction in that story, and then I saw a lot of people contacting me personally about it, and it was very overwhelming in a very good way. But yeah, that's sort of the genesis of how this story kind of broke out is one interview I did back in I want to say 2018 ish
Mhm.
or yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that I am joining a legion of people who are nerding out over the fact that you were a production assistant on Shin Godzilla. So, and you've probably had this question before, obviously, but what was that like? Like,
Yeah, no,
I'm a little bird, and I need a bird's eye view into what that was like for you.
Oh no, most definitely. It was, and this is no exaggeration. It is still, I think, the greatest honor of my life to have even stepped on foot in the Shin Godzilla set, let alone worked on it. So I, you know, I share the feeling with all you guys. Like I'm a Godzilla fan. I'm on a real Godzilla set. I was trying to keep my composure. I tried not to freak out. I tried not to fanboy too much, but it did slip a bunch of times, and they were like, "Yeah, yeah, okay." um, but it was all good because they were also all fanboys, so we all kind of fanboyed together. But to answer your question, it was. I will say, it does always seem like a magical experience, which it was. I never want to deny that, but I do want to emphasize how backbreaking it was to
Mhm.
work as a production assistant on set. I came home every night like either covered in debris, sometimes fake blood, and like standing for 13-hour days. So it was a lot of grueling work on top of the magic of filmmaking. So it did take a lot of willpower to get through the day, and but it did help seeing, in the corner of the studio there was that animatronic. So I just, whenever I feel tired, I just look at him and go, "That's why I'm doing this," and just kind of get back
Oh,
to it. But yeah, it was fantastic. But I do want to emphasize that it's a film production. Film productions are always the manual labor of film productions is something that isn't discussed a lot
mhm.
on the internet. So I did want to bring that up as well, where it was equally as magical as it was horrible on my body.
Oh, I can only imagine. Like, yeah, that is an area that really goes under discussed, right? Like we
Mhm,
see all the magic that takes place on the screen, but we don't realize that there is a legion of people working these very long hours trying to bring the spectacle to life.
mhm.
And that should be acknowledged and celebrated, right? So,
Yeah.
but it ultimately does sound like, I mean, as a Godzilla fan, a full circle moment for you.
Yes.
Or dare I say, like a happy moment, not to make a bad Godzilla reference from the Showa era, but you know, no, that's really cool. That's really cool, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about that in a
Yeah.
bit. So, well, obviously, we're all here doing this show because we are celebrating our histories as Godzilla fans, where we entered, loving these characters and this franchise, where we are now, etc. Because I also think that's very much an under discussed area that we
Mhm.
tend to have. Like we get together, we talk about the films, like, well, the battles were cool, the writing was great, but we don't talk about like our own personal experiences, right? So, how were you first introduced to Godzilla? Like, share that story all the way back from the beginning.
Yes, I did prep for this. I have something I'd like to show,
I am so
but
excited about
yeah.
that.
I was very young to the point where I have no memory of this. I rely on my parents to tell me this story. So this is not from my memory, just as a disclaimer. So I must have been like 2 or 3 at the time. I don't, or like in between the ages of 2 and 4,
Hmm.
probably. I guess I was visiting my grandparents in Japan,
Hmm.
and me and my father and my grandmother were walking through a store, and it's a store in Japan, so they got toys, which is always great. And I walk across this thing, this guy,
Uh, oh,
and apparently, according to my mother and father recounting the story, apparently I saw this and I didn't move a muscle. And then my grandmother retorted, uh, "If we don't buy him this, he's not moving from this spot." So my dad immediately buys this, which later I find out this is Mothra 3 Grand King Ghidorah.
uh,
Um,
sorry,
uh,
you know me, like I love Mothra, and
yeah.
anytime the Mothra trilogy gets love, my soul warms. Anyway, continue.
No, 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 yeah, and, I guess that was technically my introduction to Godzilla's Mothra 3 in a strange way. After, they buy this toy for me, um, my dad was like, "Well, this character is in a movie. I should probably show him where this character comes from." And like in the next few days or so, he rented, because this is back in the day when you were able to rent movies.
Oh, good
um
old days.
yeah, the classic days of VHS tapes. He rents Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, uh
Excellent.
and that was my first ever Godzilla film. And then at the end of the movie, obviously, this isn't a spoiler for people who watch this show, Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra kick King Ghidorah's butt, and I think my allegiances kind of shifted to the guy who won in the end, which is Godzilla.
Oh yeah.
So that's when it started, and then I must have been so elated by it because at some point soon after he rented more of them, and I'm sure it was like Mothra versus Godzilla and all the other like past Showa movies at the time. And that's generally where it started. So it technically began with a Grand King Ghidorah from Mothra 3.
That is so niche and awesome. I love that. I mean, at that age, when you watch Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, like, what was going through your head throughout that whole film? Like, were you just like bamboozled by what you were witnessing?
Well, I have no recollection of it, but I do, and I still do. I love dinosaurs. That's always been a constant in my life, like ever since I was like a toddler. Again, no recollection, but if I see family photos of myself when I was like a baby, I'm holding like a
Mhm.
dinosaur toy. So I guess it was just a constant in my life. And then here comes this giant one who fights a three-headed one. Well, I didn't know the concept of a dragon at the time, so I was like, "Oh, this must be a dinosaur with three heads."
Some dinosaur.
Some creature that definitely exists in the real world. Um, so I must have been so stunned by the fact of seeing, because as a kid you think it's real.
Mhm.
Seeing a giant dinosaur that's city level fighting another creature that's also the same size, even bigger, in fact. So I think it must have been a moment where my brain just caught on fire, and I guess I'm now 29 and I've never let go of that feeling because obviously I still love the character and franchise. So yeah.
I love that. It's interesting. I remember I didn't actually see Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster for the first time until, like, I was, like, 18, 20 years old because
Mhm.
throughout, like, my childhood in, like, the '90s mostly, like, I never had access to that film. So like, I had read about it, like, I had seen it on the internet, and then when I finally got to see it, I was like I was
Perfect.
just like, "This is amazing. This is amazing." And I'll just always remember being irritated. I was like, "Well, now I see" like, Mothra wasn't in Godzilla versus Monster Zero, like, I'm really annoyed about that,
Mhm.
but those string of films in, like, the mid-60s just hold a very special place in my heart because it was just, like, that transition period from Godzilla being, like, this chaotic villain to,
Yeah.
superhero-ish thereabouts, so
Mhm.
yeah, those are, like, my fond memories of that. So, like, okay, so we were in childhood mode. Now we're
Mhm.
shifting into teenage years. Like,
Mhm.
how did your fanship with Godzilla shift at that
Mhm.
point, or if it did at all?
So I would say that the love of the series hasn't really changed ever since that moment, honestly. But my specific interests within the franchise did evolve, especially as I was transitioning into becoming a filmmaker. I think I really started to observe things that I didn't see before. I was more into obviously the monster action and
Mhm,
the human dramas, of course, like just as a an audience member. But then as I started to do film, it became a thing of no longer watching it as an audience member and starting to decode it from a filmmaking perspective.
mhm,
And that aspect, I think, honestly made me love the series even more because you ended up seeing all of the passion and the blood, sweat, and tears in every movie that they put out. So that is, I think, the one shift that happened as I moved on into adulthood, where I started to notice more of the sophistication of the
mhm,
films, even the ones that are considered campy or schlocky by the masses. They still had a level of artistry and integrity and passion to it that made it a lot more valuable than a lot of people give them credit for sometimes.
right,
So I think that's where my love of the franchise kind of shifted, where it went from audience member to trying to figure out how these were made.
mhm.
Yeah, so that was my transition period in my teens.
Ooh, that's really interesting. I think that I know a lot of fans, especially ones who I've spoken to on this show, like artists, writers, filmmakers, etc. Like many of us have like that transition period where we're just like we're here for the entertainment value. And not
Mhm.
that not that the entertainment value isn't valid anymore, right? It still is, but I think we also just exist in that time where I mean, at least for me, like I was surrounded by people who were always like, "Ah, you like Godzilla? Like, what's wrong with you?
Oh,
Like,
life story. Yeah, I
like,
totally get that.
yeah, like just like really,
Yeah.
you like people in rubber suits battling, but
Mhm.
then like I think part of my way of, like, ignoring those people was, like, looking into, like, okay, what is the art taking place here? What is
Mhm.
like you were saying, like, the sophistication taking place here? So you also dealt with people being, well, terrible about.
Yeah, most definitely. Nowadays, it's really died down because of the popularity of the character. But I remember, like, when I was a kid, especially in like elementary school, like I was never like made fun of for it, but there were instances where it's like, really, you like
Mhm.
that? And I'm like, yes. And they go, okay, cool, and kind of walk away, and I'm like, where does this go? And it's I guess it was more strange for me because my parents obviously, they grew up in the 60s in Japan, so they've lived through like the heydays of the Godzilla
Mm.
franchise. So to them, these were like normal movies.
Mhm.
So for me, I kind of grew up with the notion that these were like normal blockbusters, as if like the same as like Independence Day in the
Right.
States. Like it's just a regular movie that people just kind of saw. And then when you go tell people that you like Godzilla, people kind of look at you funny, and I kind of looked them funny back. And so it was
Right,
just a
yeah.
standstill of like, okay, but yeah.
This is something I would like to look at in the future and like maybe do some research on it. But like I do feel like in the 60s, 70s, and 80s ish, like Godzilla was taken far more seriously. But for some
Mhm.
reason, there was like that segment of time in like the late 90s, like early 2000s, thereabouts, where Godzilla was just not taken seriously,
Right.
especially by like Western populations.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that has to do with, like, maybe the media exposure that we were getting, about the character, or maybe it was the fact that there was a hiatus, like, in the late
Mhm.
90s, where Godzilla just wasn't largely talked about. But then we got the TriStar Godzilla film, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I would argue, I'm sure many would disagree with me, but I would argue that the film kind of projected Godzilla back into the limelight, but
Mhm.
we got like a different impression of who Godzilla was as a
Mhm.
result of that film. But no, like, this is just me purely nerding out about like societal trends and why,
Mhm.
like at that time, people were like Godzilla, like what? I'll never forget. So I used to bring Godzilla figures to show and tell in elementary school, way
Mhm.
too, like literally every week. Like
Yeah.
it was either a Godzilla figure or a Star Trek figure, like one of the two.
Nice.
And I will never forget. I had a teacher once roll her eyes when she saw that I brought one, and that, like, was just seared into my memory
That sucks. I'm
of,
sorry. That
like,
really like, yeah. As a
I
kid,
mean,
especially.
yeah, like, so now I'm just like, "Wow," like, people don't forget that type of thing, and I've had so many Godzilla fans share with me, especially here in this space, the fact that like they often had like that small point where like they were either just shamed for it, made to feel
Mhm.
isolated, publicly humiliated for it. So I just think that now looking back on it, it's almost a shock. It's a shock to my system. I don't know if it is to yours. Looking
Oh,
at just how popular Godzilla is right now,
yeah.
how do you feel about that?
No, it's definitely a shock, especially after -1 and now GXK in theaters now. It kinda made me cry a little bit the first time I saw -1 and even, Godzilla X Kong, where, like, people were so excited to see these movies, and I kinda never thought this would happen in my life.
Same.
Es Yeah, and especially after the Millennium films ended and it didn't seem like they were gonna be released after Godzilla 2000, so it's like, okay, so I guess these are just Japanese movies that kinda live and die in Japan and will never have
Mhm.
the wide exposure here in the States, so I kinda was not hopeless, but, not having a whole lot of faith in terms of the the American perception of Godzilla and it being popular. But
Mhm.
now I kinda almost feel jealous of the kids that grow up today loving Godzilla because it's like, I wish I had, 1, the access to all these movies, like, so freely that they're just
Yeah.
kinda out and available, and, all the Showa movies are on Criterion and on streaming, and the Millennium ones are available for purchase, and, Shin Godzilla is available for purchase, and the anime ones are on Netflix, like, all that kinda stuff. I wish I had that as a kid, so I think it's great. I think it's good that times are, changing and the character perception is evolving. And I think it will only have good things as long as Toho and the people who are creating these Godzilla movies and media content will actually, keep respecting the character, making sure that the
Mhm.
character is um, dignified and sound and never falls into self-parody, which it never really has so far.
Mhm.
Anything that Toho has done, depending on no matter how you view each film, I think you can't deny that it is Godzilla. That it's not disrespecting the character. It may not be to one's liking or is to someone's liking, but it definitely is Godzilla. So I think
Right.
that's where I think I'm very happy about that.
Same here. And then when you mentioned crying, especially about, like, Godzilla Minus One and
Oh
GX,
well,
I did too. Well, my first viewing of Godzilla Minus One, I made sure was by myself because I just sat there and, like, in the theater with, like, cradling this giant thing of popcorn, just like, "Ooh, like Godzilla." Um, but no, like, I do feel like the character is spoken with a greater degree of reverence
hmm
than it used to be referred to as, and and I think, I mean, we could probably argue that the MonsterVerse has well, like, we can give the MonsterVerse a lot of credit for, like,
hmm
really bringing the pop cultural influence of Godzilla to Western audiences, but then
hmm
I feel like with the resounding successes of Shin Godzilla and Godzilla Minus One, especially, like, I feel like there's been, like, some cross-cultural awareness
oh yeah,
regarding the Godzilla's significance, right?
hmm
And not to mention the character's versatility.
hmm
But no, like I will never forget you were talking about like the end of the millennium era of Godzilla
hmm
films. Like I will never forget like the just doom and gloom that was on the internet at that time because Godzilla Final Wars was done and Toho was like, "We I don't know if Godzilla will ever come back. Like we might just
yeah,
be quote unquote shelving the character indefinitely." And just that spell of a decade
yeah.
between that film and then the first entry in the Monsterverse was so hopeless.
It was excruciating. It was
It was
really
very
excruciating.
excruciating. Godzilla Save the Earth got me through it. Like the game just
Oh
got
my
me through
god,
the
yes.
entire thing. I still play it to this day and it's like kind of mid 2000s PTSD. I'm just like, oh, like I'm having fun, but am I having fun?
It's like
Um,
recovery.
I know, right? Right? Oh my goodness. But no, that was an interesting time. And now I feel like we just have so much Godzilla to consume,
Mhm.
which feels great. Like
Yeah.
MonsterVerse, Toho's films. Um, we now have Godzilla on like television as well,
Right.
like the Monarch series. So I think that we are kind of living in another like really booming age that there's something for everybody. And didn't they just recently announce that Monarch was renewed for season 2?
Yes, they're making a season 2 and apparently a bunch of spin-offs of the MonsterVerse on Apple TV Plus. So,
Oh, that means I'm gonna
what
have
does that
to
entail? I have
cave.
no
I'm gonna have to
idea.
cave and get more than just the free trial of Apple TV Plus. No offense, Apple TV Plus. Um, well, idea legendary and Apple TV Plus, like Mothra series. I don't
I
know.
was like, I don't know if a Mothra film would be profitable in terms of, like, audience,
At least here,
at
right?
least here, yeah, it would
Hmm.
be great overseas, but here it's kinda like people know, who Mothra is, but it's still like I think you need Godzilla to sell the marquee, but if it's a Mothra, like, TV show, I think people will be a lot more inclined to go watch it, and then if that's successful, then you can make a theatrical thing, so who knows? So,
Absolutely.
I think
I
the
wonder
future is
if
very bright.
I do too, and I wonder if that's kind of what they're wanting to gauge with like these spin-offs. Like maybe we can
Maybe.
kind of I mean, if anything though, we're getting expansion of the Monsterverse, and we literally thought the Monsterverse was going to end with Godzilla versus Kong. And now here we
Mhm.
are, another film, TV show. Wasn't there I have not seen it yet, the Kong Skull Island animated
Yes, I
show.
haven't seen that as well, but, that is also technically part of the MonsterVerse. I don't know where exactly in the canon it is, but, like, it's
Mhm.
great that they're expanding and really trying to capitalize on the monster hype that we're going through now, yeah.
Right, right. I need to get my poop in a group and actually watch that
Yeah,
show because
same.
I haven't yet. I just haven't yet. Okay, so you did mention filmmaking being. I mean, we're talking teenagers yet. Like
Mhm.
that's where filmmaking took center stage for you. So, I mean, I hope that you're okay with me asking a couple of
Oh,
questions
yeah.
from the perspective of being a filmmaker, right?
Mhm.
Like, how did early filmmaking take shape for you? Like, what did that look like?
Embarrassingly enough, it began with, in my middle school, we had to do these, like, what was it? It was like a music video for Spanish class. We had to
Interesting.
yeah, we had to do like a song based on like food. So it like we were like doing a song about like onions and like carrots or something like that. It was like a cooking video, but like it had to be in Spanish, and it was me, my friend Michael, who I'm still like partners with in terms of the writing and the filmmaking,
Mhm.
and Andrew, who is my friend, who's still my friend today. We made that video, and after that, you know, we were like, hey, this is really fun, and I used to um edit on iMovie, like God, old school iMovie.
Oh,
Yeah, classic days of
love
video
those
editing.
days.
Well, I use iMovie to edit all of our vacation videos that we took when I was a kid. My
Mhm.
dad kind of sat me down, taught me how to use it, and said like, "Here, go edit our vacation video on this year and this summer and this summer." And then I started like using toys to make like little Godzilla fan trailers of like it's Godzilla
Mhm.
versus Guy again. I just kind of smash them together with a old camcorder that still used cassette tapes. So it's like that era of
That's
stuff.
iconic.
Yeah, no, it was stressful because you had to keep buying those tapes, and it was horrible, but it was really fun. Um, so I had some experience like using the tools of like early days of shall we say video editing, and then my friends and I in middle school were like, hey, you know, this is fun. Why don't we do these like dumb skits where you dress up as a detective and I'm a serial killer and we have orange and purple guns and we do like a rip off of Seven or Zodiac, and we just kind of did like those kind of like cops and robbers kind of movies where they
Mhm.
were like, if you look, I cannot watch them today. They are like so embarrassing to
Are they
watch.
on the internet somewhere? Are they out there?
Uh, yes, yes.
Oh,
On a
oh,
on a channel that's a little secret, but I might give it to you personally. But
okay. We
I
won't we won't reveal it to the ether, but
yes,
I
I
would
will give it to
like
you though.
I would
Only
love that.
special people get to see these because it's
I
so
am
embarrassing.
honored. I am
Thank you,
honored.
thank you. But then after that one, we started doing some more skits which were less embarrassing, which are all on very publicly on YouTube, and they started off as like our ways of hanging out. Like our ways of
Mm.
hanging out was let's all grab our friends together, grab a camera, no script, just like ad lib some stuff. Like this is the general story, this is the general gist, and just kind of shoot something with no mic, no like professional gear. It was just like a way for us to just be friends and chill. And then slowly, as we were entering high school, we kind of went, oh, we're actually kind of like good at this. Like we're getting better and better as we do more of these. And at some point, it went from hobby to like interest to career path. So that's sort of the genesis of where that kind of came from. Yeah.
That I'm nerding out right now. Well, because I mean, I feel like as creators, right? Like we're often kind of like shamed into just not thinking about our juvenilia, like the
Right.
creations we would make at that certain time. And I mean, this show has kind of coaxed me to be a little bit more upfront about like the creations I used to make too. I mean, when you talked about like the skits and like the trailers and stuff like that really resonated with me because I mean, I used to like I started my writing career. Well, I started my interest in writing through Godzilla fan fiction.
Nice.
And I used to I used to take all of my friends and and make us characters in
Mhm.
these fanfics. And then I got to a point in late high school where I was like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. By the way, everyone, I do not consider myself a filmmaker now. I do not have that talent nor capability. However, I was at that time I was like, I'm going to be a filmmaker. I had like that really rustic, like puff a cigarette kind of mentality of,
Right, right.
being a filmmaker. And so I would I would get my friends together and we would do music videos acting out scenes from I'm so embarrassed sharing this. Acting out scenes from the fanfics,
Nice.
and I will never forget that the one song that I was really obsessed with at the time was Viva Forever by the Spice Girls.
Okay, yeah.
Had I like, how did the universe not know that I was a homosexual at that time because of that? I will never know. But, like, so I picked that song and I just, like, weaved, like, these sepia tone music
Ooh,
videos
nice.
with like, it was they're out there somewhere on Vimeo, not anywhere else on
I gotta
YouTube.
check it out.
Because but I'll have to send you one of them. You'll
Yeah.
as compensation for
Yes.
me seeing one of
Yeah, we'll
your
trade one
early
of our early
films.
stuff, yeah.
But at the end of the day, like, I think now that I do writing for as a career, I've learned to kind of set aside that, like, shame of that juvenilia work, and I've learned to kind of go back and celebrate it and be
Mhm,
like, "You know what? Wow, look at how far I've come
mhm.
since then." Do you ever do that where you, like, look back at your older work and then look at your work now and you're just like, "Wow."
Most definitely. Every now and again, me and my friends who, we're still doing this today. Um, every now and again, like we always meet at my place here, usually every Friday night just to hang out or discuss future projects and stuff. And every now and again, we'll be like, hey, let's pop on like something from like 2013, like our 2014 13 days, and then we'll kind of watch and go like, oh god, oh god. But then, after it ends, we kind of like make our little like inside jokes and memes about it. I think we love seeing the growth of how far we've come and
Mhm.
how much we've changed as people, as artists, and yeah, it is a sobering thing just to kind of like revisit your past works. And I think it's hard to grow unless you see your own mistakes. So I kind of like
Right.
seeing when we stumble as a group, and we kind of go,
Absolutely.
okay, we'll never do that again. So yeah.
Right. Yeah, like, and, like, we can look back on it now and be like, "Oh," I mean, for the laugh, of course, but, like,
Hmm.
wow, like, we evolved, right? No,
Hmm.
I'll never forget, it was I think it was last season, I had a viewer commented on one of an episode of the show, and they were like, "Donnie, I have followed you since your old YouTube channel in 2007." Look at when
Whoa.
you they were like, "And I remember you used to do you used to do covers of Mothra songs and turn them into music videos. Those were
Wow.
way worse than the fan fiction music videos." But I was just like, "That's a deep cut. You remember those cringy Mothra music videos I used to make?"
That's awesome. That's honestly really cool.
Well, and I think that exchange kind of helped me feel a little bit less embarrassed about it
Mhm.
because they were like, "Yeah, like, you really kind of, like, inspired, like, me to, like, do music," and I'm like, with my bad singing and my terrible editing skill, like, it was a very wholesome moment that kind of, like, validated that little corner of, like, my past where I was just like, "Ooh, I used to make these things and put them on MySpace and YouTube in the early days, ugh,"
Oh,
but
MySpace. Yeah.
the MySpace days,
Yeah. The old
goodness.
days. Yeah.
So, but wow, memory lane. And okay, so we're done with teenagers, right? Like,
Mhm.
now that, like, spanning into 20s, like, you are a filmmaker, writer, producer, you've literally been a production assistant on a Godzilla film, like in that span of time, like, what has it been like to navigate these spaces and kind of look at yourself in the identity as like a filmmaker?
Yeah, that's a good question. Especially after, because I guess I didn't realize it at the in the moment, but I did start my 20s on Shin Godzilla because I was 20 at the time, so I kind of
That is
started.
fair.
Yeah, so that was kind of the genesis of my 20s because I'm in the last year of my 20s now. Um, but I think working on Shin Godzilla somehow made me love these movies even more and love filmmaking even more because I got to speak with so many artists like on a personal level, like, hey, like, you worked on this movie, like, how did this happen, how did this happen? And they told me a bunch of stuff about some of the past movies. And like a few of the crew guys also had like Godzilla Final Wars crew t-shirts, so they were working on Godzilla films for like 20, 30 years, and I got to speak with them and learn like hear a bunch of stories from all these past movies. And I would now like revisit some of the movies and go like, "Oh yeah, like I remember him telling me about this shot or that shot." So those aspects I think made my love for Godzilla even somehow it went from like 100 to even like more than 100, which I don't know how that's even possible. Um,
It's
so
possible.
yeah, it's definitely possible. Um, but yeah, but I think and then after Shin Godzilla, just working tirelessly on my own stuff, I think it the appreciation for not only Godzilla but the craft just keeps growing and growing, and watching so many movies now in theaters that really inspire me. I think it really does help a lot to shape my mindset and where I am in filmmaking, where I am in the Godzilla like fandom. It really does inform me of like how I watch these movies and movies in general. I grown to appreciate watching movies in a very specific way.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I imagine though, like having that opportunity probably, I mean, in some way, was it like validating as a filmmaker as well? Uh,
Oh
like
yeah,
like
most
being
definitely.
in that career area. I mean, I don't know about you, but like for me as a writer, like I really struggled early on navigating writing spaces because I just felt like this impending imposter syndrome doom. Um,
Yeah, I know
and
what you mean.
it was a and I it's such a universal like thing for a lot of people to navigate through. Did you ever, I mean, feel free to share whatever you feel
Mhm.
comfortable sharing. Did you experience that early on in the process?
Yeah, I really I was struggling after high school because as everyone was, and including myself, as we were all applying for colleges, I had a really hard time figuring out what my like 19-year-old self, 20-year-old self was going to look like, because I originally I wanted to be a scientist. That was kind of my
Mhm.
passion ever since I was a kid, hence dinosaurs. So that was I still have a passion for science, and I do want to get to it at some point in my life, if I
Mhm.
can. But that was my goal ever since I was a kid. So college was kind of like a must, where like if I wanted to do research or anything like that, I had to get a degree, had to go to a good college that had good STEM programs and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But then in my high school days, when all the skits were coming out, and then I tell this story a lot, but watching the end of Evangelion when I was 14 kind of
Oh,
changed my life a little bit. Like that was the film that made me want to be a filmmaker. So,
that's a good
oh
one
yeah,
too. That's a good one too. Ooh.
yeah. I saw that, and I think my brain just caught on fire, and then I kind of went, I want to be a storyteller. I don't just want to watch movies. I want to make them.
Mhm.
So that was kind of life informing. So when I was 18, well, 17 into 18, because we have to do like all the common apps and stuff, I was really in a rock and a hard place where
Mhm.
I wanted to do science, but I wanted to do film as well, and I had a hard time trying to figure out which path I was going to go in. Um, and then at some point I was like, no, I'm doing film. This is what I want to do. This is the first thing I want to do. I can get to science later, but I do want to do film first. And I had a long discussion with my mom of like, this is what I want to do. What do you think? And she basically said like, I'm going to give you 24 hours, and if you think this is the right path, I will support you, but if you have doubts, don't do it. So I thought about it, and then after a few hours, I was like, I'm doing it. And she said, okay. But it led to the problem of like, what am I going to do
Mhm.
after high school, where like I'm not employed. I don't, because film isn't a thing where you can make money unless you're, you know, in the industry and you have a job
Mhm.
within, Hollywood itself. So I was really struggling at the time. Like, obviously, I was making short films trying to hone in the craft, but that doesn't equate to actual experience,
Mhm.
on a film set and that kind of stuff. And I did some background acting work, but that's only just hanging out on set for a few hours and like kind of standing in a room. So it's not
Mhm.
a lot of experience. So when Shin Godzilla popped up, I think I was a lot more confident within myself to see the path that I was going on. So I really understand what you were saying, where between 18 and 20, I was really struggling with like, what am I doing? What is the path I'm going on? And I think it really wasn't until Shin Godzilla, like you were saying, the validation
Mhm.
really set in, and I was like, okay, like I can do this. I want to do this, and I think it was also a test of like, can you be on a set for that many hours in a day and still have the passion to wake up the next morning and go there. Because
Mhm,
to
mhm.
wake up at 4 a.m. every day,
Whew. Yeah,
as
I'm
I
not a morning
that
person, I would struggle with that.
no, no, I hate the mornings, so it was awful. And then, like, as I left my aunt's house where I was staying in Tokyo, I saw the sun rising. Like, that's how early it was.
Whew.
So I had to do that every single day, and it was a 2-hour train ride to Toho Studios. So it was a struggle, and I had to ask myself, like, hard questions of, like, this this might be your life at some point. Like, obviously,
Mhm,
as a director, you'll be, on set less hours than a PA, but still, like, you're gonna have to be on a set for God knows how long, and you probably have more stress than everyone else because it's your vision. You have to make it
mhm,
work somehow. So, um, my experience on Shin Godzilla did help me answer those hard questions that I didn't know that I had an answer to. So I did feel the validation of, like, okay, like, I can do it. I want to be a filmmaker. I can be a filmmaker. Yeah.
wow. That's really that's really interesting. It's interesting to see just how this franchise specifically has influenced our pathways, right?
Hmm.
No, like, I think at a certain point for me as a writer comparatively, like, I did have that imposter syndrome at first until I finally had some, opportunities in the
Hmm.
writing field that would give me, some form of validation of, like, okay, this got published. Wow, like that's great. I can put this on a resume or a CV. Um, and then it got to a certain point. Like, I mean, the past 4 years, like I feel like I've been trucking along pretty well as a writer, but
Hmm.
like last year I had the opportunity to work on a Godzilla project in the form of a
Right.
comic book, which is
Hmm.
still messing with my mind because I'm just like, again, the full circle moments, right? But
Yeah.
like it's just like these, like, if you really love something enough, I feel like if you keep working and keep
Hmm.
your momentum, eventually you will cross paths with that thing that you love on a higher basis, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. So
Yeah. No, 100% agree with that. Yeah.